Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Breakout. Now, this film is going to be coming out next week on April 11th on VOD, and I had the opportunity to check out this film early this year when I had my conversation with the co-writer and director of the film, and Brandon Slagle, who was on my show, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, earlier this year, when we were helping trying to promote the physical release of the film that he had written and directed that came out last year called Battle of Saipan, which is a film that I really did enjoy. I've also done a review for that movie here on the channel in the NRW, and I highly recommend you guys check out that video, but also I really recommend you guys check out that movie because it really is a fun, wonderful action film, in my opinion, that a lot of people had put in one of the top, if I recall correct, top 10 best action films of 2022. So it really is worth your time to check it out. I recommend you guys buy it, rent it, whatever you do, but spend money on it because it really is worth your time checking that film out. But with this movie, on the other hand, with Breakout, although I did enjoy the film, I will say right now that I still think that Battle of Saipan is Brandon Slagle's best film. There's so much about that movie that I've said before why I enjoy the film. But this movie, on the other hand, there's a lot that I've taken away from this film, which I'll go into my review in a bit here. But I will say right now that I won't get into really any spoilers here. I may point out a few things here and there that may be more or less in that spoiler territory, but nothing that's going to take away from your enjoyment of the film. But just avoiding a lot of major spoilers here. But of course, I'll get into my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. Having taken control of a maximum security prison, a criminal mastermind faces off against a retired Black Ops agent who had been visiting his incarcerated son. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie is that I'm going to start out by saying that I love the action genre. The action genre is my favorite genre of all time. And right after that's the horror genre. But for me, the action genre, one of the reasons why I love it so much is because I love the stories that we follow where it's either the everyday man or woman that is thrown against some of the worst obstacles that they have to overcome. Some obstacles that just seem impossible to overcome at the end of the day, but yet they've been able to deal with it, handle their business, and then become victorious at the end of those respective films. And there were a ton of movies that dealt with the everyday person having to overcome those set hurdles. And I enjoy the fact that this movie is a throwback to those old school action films from the 80s and 90s where, and I hope when I say this here, it doesn't come off as being disrespectful because that's not how I meant to come across when I say this here, but I just enjoy the fact that I get to watch this movie, have fun with it, and then just go on with my day. As much as I love films and I love films that get me thinking, that stay with me, and that I carry that with me throughout the years, and that I still think about what I've seen and what does it mean and so on and so forth, I enjoy all that as well. But I also do enjoy a good popcorn film, and that's what this movie offers here for me. It's just a fun movie that you can just watch, enjoy, and then move on with your day. At the same time, I will also give a lot of praise to Brandon Slagle because there was some insight that I become aware of here about what it took to make this film, and for the hurdles that everyone in the production had to deal with to get this film made. The film turned out quite well, in my opinion. And I will also point out too that as far as the actors are concerned, if everyone who knows that watches my reviews here and who know me personally, they'll know that Mandylor is one of my favorite actors of all time. Anytime I see the name Mandylor on the marquee, I know for a fact he will always deliver 100%. And what he does in this movie, in my opinion, is just nothing short of that. I think he's a phenomenal in this film. And Mandylor, I mean, you got to watch films that he's done in the past as well. I mean, I've pointed out before that The Brave is one of those films that I think is just a truly, truly underrated movie, a beautiful action film. Of course, Battle of Saipan, which is another film that I think is very well done under the direction of Brandon Slagle here. But the thing is that I always feel like Mandylor is one of those actors that you put him in the front of the camera and he's going to deliver something really special. And I mean that every single time I say that. I think he's that good of an actor, and he's also a phenomenal director as well too. So his performance in this movie, I had no doubt was going to be superior. And everyone else around him also does a really good job when it came to their performance, especially when it comes to having to be one-on-one with him, where I always felt like, can they keep up with him? That's how much of a great of an actor I believe he really is. That if for me to think, can everyone else keep up with him? That says a lot about him as a performer and also as just his work ethic as well too. So a lot of praise to Lewis in that respect. But also I'm going to point out here too that the actor that plays his son, whose name has right in front of me right now, is Mr. Christos Andrews. I'll be frank, I'm not really familiar with who he is, but I thought he did a pretty good job considering with what the overall story is all about here, because in the film, we see that in the beginning of the movie, his character, Christos Andrews' character, is caught in a bit of a scuffle here where he ends up killing a cop more or less by mistake, and that's where he ends up in prison as a result of that. So his father, we find out, is trying to reconnect with his son, and then finds out his son is in prison, goes to the prison where his son is at, and tries to find a way to reconnect with him. But you can tell from the conversations that they're having that there's a lot of turmoil between, there's a lot of conflict between them, and they've never really came to resolve those issues because his father has always been away doing a lot of missions that kept him away from the family. And then there are other things along the way too about how his father felt like his son was too naive, because his mother was also that naive as well too. And so we get a lot of history in a short span of time to understand what the relationship was like between the two of them. Clearly they still love each other, especially, you know, Lewis's character, where he definitely wants to reconnect with his son, where his son, on the hand, just is kind of like in the middle, but leaning more towards just get away from me. And I thought that us getting that aspect of the relationship really early on obviously does help out with the motivation for the character once the prison it gets overtaken by the criminal mastermind played by Brian Krause. The story overall makes a lot of sense as far as the overall motivation for these characters, because it is about the father and son's relationship at the end of the day, and having to connect with them to feel that sense of satisfactory victory that we get at the end of this movie. So that's not a spoiler here, because if for a film of this sort that's a tribute to more of the 80s and action 90s action films, I say from the 80s and 90s, I meant to say, we can always assume what the outcome is going to be. But I really did appreciate that we have that established relationship early on to see the hurdles they have to go through and if it's well earned at the end of the day. And I always felt like that was one of the situations that we get really early on, and seeing the differences between the two characters, how they clash with each other, and then how they reconnect through the set hurdles they're going through to make it a very reasonable and effective and more or less authentic reunion, if you will, which I think they've done really well in this film. Now, as far as the villain's concerned, Brian Krause, I'm sure a lot of people may recognize him for a film he'd done a number of years ago called Sleepwalkers, which is a movie I haven't seen since I was a kid, but I remember as a kid just being kind of freaked out by it. And I think a lot of other people may recognize him for his role in Charm, which I know my wife is a huge fan of the original show, and so she recognized him from that show as well. I was actually quite surprised as far as how good he really was as a villain, because apart from what I recall seeing in Sleepwalkers, outside of that, I haven't really been keeping up a lot with him as far as his acting is concerned, outside of maybe his Charm, which my wife has always been watching, and I kind of watch in between here and there, but was never really invested to check out the show, including with his scenes as well. But he's actually quite good as the villain in this film, which he's not a physical guy. He's more or less of a thinker type of villain, where he learns how to manipulate people without having to use his body at all, if you will. So I think in that respect, he's been able to pretty much set the standard about the type of guy that he is and how intelligent he is to be able to more or less overcome the various hurdles that he has to deal with along the way to be able to make this escape, which I think was actually handled quite well. One other thing I want to point out too is with regards to the action sequences. Now, I did like them. I didn't love them, but this is not a negative by any means for me to point this out here. But considering the short schedule they had and what they were having to pull off here on the spot for the most part, I think they actually turned out quite well. And of course, Lewis being a martial arts in his own right, and knowing how the stunt world works, and having to get the shots right for him to sell the punch and receive the punch as well too, under his direction, and also with Brandon as well too, they've done a really good job to get what they need for those respective action sequences to make it enjoyable. So kudos to everybody involved in getting that done here. Now, one thing I want to say to more or less close out my positives here is that Tom Sizemore, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, this is an actor that I'm going to say right now, you forget how good of an actor he really is. Like, Tom Sizemore is one of those actors, when you watch the films he's in, when you look at a movie like Heat, Pearl Harbor, I mean, I don't think that the film was all that great, but I appreciate the technical aspects of it, but the performances for the most part were pretty good, I would say. But Tom Sizemore in those respective films, Saving Private Ryan, I said Heat, True Romance, Point Break, although he's in for a small little snippet. There's another film he did with Stallone, I think it was Lock Up. I should know it because I've seen the movie a million times. But every time Tom Sizemore's on the screen, you remember this guy is a really, really good actor. And this performance in this film is no different. He really is phenomenal in this movie, with the very little time that we get with him in the film. But with his presence in the film alone definitely does add a lot more of an impact, understanding that he's more or less like the middle guy who is trying to help the hero who the hero's helping him as well, but he's the guy you can see that is not, there's no ulterior motive behind him, that what you see is what you get, which I appreciate about that, because you always want to have somebody that is going to be the good, strong support system for the hero, and he definitely does offer that as well too. So I want to give a lot of props to Tom for that, and we lost a legendary actor, in my opinion, and truly one of the best ones out there, because when you look at his filmography, he's done some phenomenal work, but he's worked with some of the best in the business. And every single film that I have come across, even some of the more straight to VOD ones, his performance is always top tier, in my opinion. One other person I want to point out here too, that I gotta give a huge shout out here to, is Victor Devanny, I meant to say, who is in The Sandlot. As soon as I saw his face in this movie, when I first saw it early this year, I was just overjoyed. As cheesy as it's going to sound for me to say this here, but I was thrilled. And I remember I even messaged Brandon as well too. I was like, "You fucking got Victor from The Sandlot in your movie, dude." I was so overjoyed with that, and he's great in this movie too. I will also point out too that despite the fact that I recognized him right away from his work that he had done in The Sandlot, I really did appreciate the fact that as the film progressed along the way, I completely forgot all about that, because what he's delivering in this movie, although for a very small portion of the film, he does a really an effective job of being another support system for the overall story that we get in this movie. So I got to give a lot of kudos to him for him to just be able to do his job, and as far as getting the showcasing what the importance of his character is for the overall narrative, and for me to forget that this is the guy from The Sandlot, and to just enjoy his performance based on those merits alone for this film. So I got to give a lot of props to him on that as well too. And another thing I want to point out too, just to really close out my positives, is that this film is also produced under Devanny Pinn, who is the wife of Brandon Slagle. Considering that she had, I believe I recollect correctly, that she had came up with the story and then obviously put the film together here, she's got another film that she's directing, or that she had directed recently, that is going to be coming out later this year. That's going to be her directorial debut. I'm really excited to see what she's going to do with that film, having come across it with this movie and seeing how much of her input that she had in this film as far as the overall production is concerned, for it to turn out the way that it did. Because as much as I really did enjoy the film, I'm sure she definitely had a lot to say in the matter about what the direction of the story is going to be, and learning how to work with others as well too, including with her husband, who she worked on a lot of his productions, of course. But just to understand what her journey was like in getting this film made, and then the events that occurred after the fact that led her into making her directorial debut, I'm really curious to see about what her story is like in that respect, because having seen this movie, there's a lot that I've taken away from here, and I just wanted to see what her main input was for the final cut of this film, because as much as I enjoyed it, I'm also really curious about that as well. But for me right now, that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. My first negative with this movie, I'm going to say, is this. As much as I really did enjoy the film, and it is a fun movie, that hasn't changed at all. But I feel like the limitations to this film did hurt it at the same time, because a movie of this sort is definitely a big story where you have to have the time, the resources to be able to flesh out certain things that I feel like this movie had done well into doing so, but it was still too condensed, in my opinion, where you just needed more time with that when it came to, especially when it came to the relationship between the father and the son. Although, as I said earlier, that it was handled well, and I still believe it's still handled very well, but I felt like there was more time needed to spend with those two characters to get some of those other details fleshed out a little bit further, especially when it came to the villain played by Brian Krause, because as much as I really did like his performance, I didn't really find his character all that interesting. And again, this isn't a way of me saying that his performance wasn't any good, that the character didn't serve his purpose. It definitely did serve their purpose, but that was the thing that I felt that was missing for me in the movie, is that the other added elements to get more of a fleshed out story with this character. Because as much as I really did like Brandon Krause's performance in the film, something was missing for me, and I think it's just we needed more time to flesh out his character along with some of the other details in this film too, especially when it came to our two main leads in the film with the father and son. And then when it came to the action sequence, as I mentioned before, I did like it, and they actually were handled quite well. Again, the limitations to that, I felt like they kind of held it back a little bit, because the movie runs around, I think, an hour and 26 minutes, and maybe an additional I'm going to say probably 10 to 15 minutes to flesh out some of those other details. It would have definitely made this film a little bit more fulfilling, if you will. But again, you can always have more time as far as the runtime is concerned for a film. But if you don't have the proper resources to be able to, in the time to be able to get the shots you need and the time to be able to flesh out certain other details for the film in itself, you can always have a 2-hour film, but it could still be shallow. But although there's a lot in this movie that I did take away from that I really did enjoy, it was just too condensed for me to really fully enjoy the film to its full potential. But despite that, I still liked what I came across here. But I always felt like that was a major setback for the movie. One other thing I'm also going to point out here too, as far as the negatives are concerned, is that as much as I really did like the film, I will also point out too that, as I said before, I still feel like Battle of Saipan is a film that I think is Brandon's best work. This film, on the other hand, I look at this movie and I think, imagine if they just had more time, more money, more resources to really expand on those areas that I think the film could have certainly excelled in if given the opportunity. And I always felt like that was the missing point for this film, as I kind of obviously pointed out before, because Brandon Slagle, there's a film that I'm going to point out that I came across after I seen Battle of Saipan, where I remember thinking this is his best film. There's a movie that he had that's called House of Manson, which I was not expecting to, I'll be frank, not like. I was not expecting to like the film. When I saw that movie, I was genuinely surprised at how good that film really is, because this is a more or less kind of like what's the best way I can describe it? It's not a action film or horror movie by any means. It's a very strong character-driven movie following the story of Charles Manson, but not the guy that we've seen before who's always, doing all these shenanigans. It's a much more, the best way I can describe it is a human side to that man in that film. And I'll never forget from a conversation that Brendan had a while back about where the inspiration to take on the character of Charles Manson for that film had come from. I always remember that. So when I saw the movie, I just remember thinking, this guy is a much better director than I anticipated. Even though I thought he did great with Battle of Saipan, I just remember thinking, like, that's the director that I think he really is at his best when he tells those character stories. And when you get the character pieces in this movie, again, it's too condensed. And I felt like that was the part that hurt the film the most, because the limited amount of time that we have with those emotional beats that I feel like he had done really good with when it came to House of Manson and also with Battle of Saipan, expanding that a little bit further, I think could have had a much more emotional impact with the overall narrative. Because I think that having seen House of Manson, having seen that after I seen this film earlier this year, and then watching that movie and then watching this film again, that's where I felt like, okay, now I understand where the disconnect kind of came from. Because I feel like that if Brandon had gotten the opportunity to flesh on those things a little bit better, we could have gotten a much better film. Again, not to disregard all the hard work that went into this movie, because you can tell it's up there on the screen because everyone did work hard on this movie. But that's where I feel like the film had been it hurt the film the most, I meant to say. So I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I think you understand where I'm coming from here. But for me, that's going to be in there my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. So as I've already said before, I really did enjoy this movie. I will say right now that this is a film that I think everyone should really take the time to look at, because despite the fact that the issues that I had with the film is just due to the limitations that this movie has, it's still a fun film for me at the end of the day. If you just take away, just enjoy for what it is, I think you'll walk away with a good time with it. I understand that not every film is going to be for everybody, but if you just look at those little finer details, I think there's going to be something you can take away from this movie that will make you appreciate all the hard work that went into this film. So for me, I'm going to say this movie is a raise the glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. And if you have seen this movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie. And also remember, this movie will be coming out next week on April 11th on VOD. So I highly recommend you guys go buy it, rent it, but spend money on it. Support the filmmakers out there, because a lot of hard work making this movie. And there's a lot of upcoming projects that Brandon Slagle and his wife Devanny Pinn, I meant to say, are working right now that I'm actually really excited for. So please go out of your ways to spend money in the movie, check it out, and let me know what you guys think, again, in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so so already, make sure you guys subscribe to the NRW. Make sure you guys share, like, videos, and hit the notification bell while you're down there as well. And also follow us on social media on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts here too. And I'm going to stick with just one of my social media accounts. That's going to be You're So Cool with Rob Medina on Instagram, and on on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And also be on the lookout for my guests in the near future here with Brandon Slagle, who's the co-writer and director of Breakout. And also, I'm going to be speaking with his wife, Devanny Pinn, who produced the movie as well, too, in the very near future. So be on the lookout for that. But that'll be it for this week, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.